Well, hi again, folks. Thank you so much for coming tonight to watch this information session about the election of the 2022 USASA Student Board. I don't have my video on, but this voice that you can hear, my name is Bridget and I am the Assistant Returning Officer for this election. And I'm also the Coordinator of Governance and Student Leadership at USASA. So I will be a voice that you will hear throughout this election process. And also once you're elected, I work closely with the board reps as well as they go throughout their terms. So before we start with the formalities, I would first like to acknowledge that I'm meeting you today on the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and that I would like to show my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I would also like to extend that acknowledgement to people of the First Nations people all over the continent, as of course UniSA has campuses online and in Mount Gambier and in Whyalla. So, and of course there might be people joining us today or viewing via Twitch that are on all different parts of the continent as well. So so thank you for coming. This session should take just a little under an hour, depending on how many questions that we get. And there'll be a few things that we're going to cover today to give you some information that you need before nominations open next week. So this is a little bit of what we're going to cover. So first I'll go over a bit of background about USASA and hopefully provide some context as well for why we run the election the way that we do and why the positions are structured the way that they are. A little bit more about the actual roles of the board as a collective, and also then for board reps as individuals, what the expectations are there. I will then go across the election process itself and recap some of the things that we've been communicating by social media and the actual timeline for the election. And then I'll go a little bit about why it's worth running. So you'll see that the nomination process itself is a little bit of a labour-intensive process, but it is worth it. And there are good reasons for this, as you will discover. Of course, then at the end, we will open the floor to questions. If you do have questions throughout this process, throughout this session, I'm more than happy for you to use the hand up function on Zoom, or if you're following by Twitch, please leave a comment there, and my colleague who is monitoring the Twitch chat will send it to me here via Zoom so I can see that as well. But you may want to just wait until the end, because there's a good chance that I will answer your question as we go along anyway. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, hopefully you do a little bit, USASA is the University of South Australia Student Association. So it's a non-for-profit incorporated association with the mission to empower students to shape their own university journey, and the vision that UniSA students are empowered and have the capacity and skills for living and leading. So this mission and vision statement were produced a few years ago when we created our last strategic plan for the organisation. If you are elected to the board, you will get to take part in the co-creation of a new strategic plan and vision next year. So that's an exciting little bonus that the 2022 board will get to be part of. Hello, who's just joined us there? I'll just ask if everyone could take their camera, if their microphone on mute as we join. That would be really helpful. Awesome, thank you. Beautiful. So yeah, that is an exciting part of what the 2022 board will be involved in. And the reason that we do have this process and why USASA, the relevance of USASA being an incorporated association, is that we are a fee-for-service organisation. We're established to provide services to UniSA students. So you'll see there that we're a member organisation. This is why students vote, because students are our members, and that the role of the board and USASA is to represent the interests of those members. So to make sure that the stuff that students want is what is being provided, and also to help the university provide those services as well. Hopefully you recognise some of these posters from either your student diaries or the website or social media, or if you've ever engaged in any of these services. It's just a selection of what we do. And I guess a bit of a reminder of the context of what USASA is as an organisation. So it is also important to mention that USASA board reps themselves don't actually necessarily provide these services. So what the board does is it provides the strategic and, top level decision making about what those services should be. And then there is a team of USASA staff who are actually professionals in these areas who then go and provide those services. So you can see, can you guys see my cursor? nod if I can see, yep, you can, beautiful. So you can see that the board directs the Chief Executive Officer about what it is that the board thinks the direction of USASA should be. And then the Chief Executive Officer then funnels that information down to the staff. So if you think of it this way, the board has one staff member, and that's the CEO, and then the CEO has the staff that then carry out the services. You can see here there's a couple of examples of things that we do, and these are the things that were on those posters on the previous slide. You'll also see here there is a little arrow that says support, and that goes from staff to the board. And that's because we realize that, you are students. It's very unlikely that we're going to get a board of students who have been board directors before, or have that background or have that knowledge from the beginning. So we do see this as a learning opportunity for you guys as well. And we do make sure that there is support to guide you through this process, because of course it can be a bit, it is a lot, like in reality, it is a lot of responsibility to be a board member. So we want to make sure that you do have the support to do that. And that is also why there is a finance advisor and a legal advisor who support the board as well in this process. So that's kind of how the structure of USASA works. And the significance of having that, incorporated association with a board of directors that then so on, it's why we do have you'll find that there are some strict processes around the election process. And that's to make sure that we are meeting our obligations both to the state government as an incorporated association and also to the members, as you're the trustees of the funds that we have to carry out these services. So that's just in general USASA in a nutshell and how that works. If I've said a few words here and you haven't heard them before, you're not quite sure how that kind of structure works, you will see, bear with me, I've got 2 slides going, that this is what the actual makeup of the board is. So you'll see that there are 15 representative positions there that are elected, and these are the positions that are up for nomination in this election. So every year we have an election for the full board, and that is for the next year's term. And so all 15 of those positions are going to be vacant. You'll see onto the side there, I say non-voting members in these ex officio positions. And that's because, as I mentioned before, there are also the CEO and the advisors that sit on the board, but don't have the decision-making powers. They're just there to advise you and guide you and provide advice. So, you're not just jumping completely in the deep end. You're not going to be completely blind doing this process. And because the terms do change every year, it does mean that there is that kind of knowledge that carries over from what the previous board has done. And you will be, guided in this process. But ultimately, this is a board for student association where students will make the decisions, which is why the elected reps are the voting members and the other members are non-voting. So you'll see here that there's the 15, positions, well, the 14 positions other than president. There are slightly different roles and, you're all equals as members of the board. Those are the 14 positions, but there are also certain requirements that do come along with representing those different cohorts. But starting with the president, there are some different responsibilities that are involved in being the president. And it's important that you do know this from the beginning if that is a position that you are going to be thinking about nominating for, because it is quite a lot more responsibility in terms of the actual day-to-day stuff that you'll be doing than some of those other positions. So while you're all equally board members, the president does have a lot more expectations and responsibilities on them. So, one thing is to really seek that feedback from students and make sure that those decisions that you're making are in fact what students want, and that you are representing the desires and the needs of your members, which is the students. The president is also the media contact for USASA. So you may have seen in the past, sometimes the president will appear in, an advertiser article about higher education. Maybe they've been contacted by a journalist to give an opinion on something. I'm pretty sure the president is actually present in this meeting. You'll recognise his name, Noah Beckman. He's been in the press a little bit throughout the year, particularly around, this university response to COVID and all those kinds of things. So that's one thing you'll need to consider. You need to be prepared to, have that background and to do that kind of work. The president is also responsible for setting the actual processes of the board itself. So making sure that they're chairing meetings, making sure that meetings are happening, making sure that the board reps are supported in carrying out their functions as well. And also really setting that agenda and setting the culture of what the board will be throughout the year and the kind of work that you'll do as reps. and overseeing the conduct and making sure that everyone's got the resources and stuff that they need to get their job done. There are also a couple of responsibilities from the university that the president must adhere to. So, for example, the president will be on the University Council, which is the most senior governing body of UniSA. And that is, I think there are monthly meetings that can be quite intensive. And there is certain expectations that come with that role as well. So the university does provide a bit more support to the president to carry that out as well. The president is usually also on the academic board, which is a subcommittee of council. And it's also the committee of the university that, decides which degrees are going to exist and all of those kinds of things. So pretty high level stuff. And then the student appeals committee as well, which is, if there's ever any kind of, decision of the university the student has appealed, that is the ultimate final thing. And again, another opportunity for the president to have some really high level decision-making stuff, and really does demonstrate the differences in the role. So the stuff that I'm about to talk about on the next slide, not only does that cover board reps, but if you think of what the role of the president is, everything on this slide as well as everything on the next slide. So if that is a position that you're thinking about running for, keep that in mind, that it is quite a bit more intensive. And we would say that the president probably needs to be prepared to spend about 30 hours a week on average doing USASA activities. And, that is partly attending those meetings and preparing for those meetings and doing all this other stuff I've mentioned as well. So these here are the responsibilities that we would consider the other board members to do. So consulting with students and understanding what they want. Of course, I put that on the other slide for the president, but it's also, that's only one person. There's 30-something thousand students at UniSA, and each board rep represents a different cohort of students or comes from a different campus. So it really is important that they are also prepared to go out and understand what it is that students want and are taking part in that consultation process and helping the board make informed decisions. There are also opportunities to chair meetings and participate in USASA committees. So I've put here finance and governance. They're just in clubs. They're just a couple of examples of committees that the board does operate, but basically that's where, the nitty-gritty work gets done. So at a minimum, there's board meetings every month, but then you'll have committee meetings that then report to those. And that saves you having like a 7-hour meeting once a month. You can break that work up and make sure that the board reps who are interested in these particular areas are able to focus on those particular things. Working on projects as well is another thing. So not only projects within USASA, but also sometimes the university would like student feedback and they call on a member of the USASA board to take part in a project or in a process that they're wanting a student voice on. So, there's different opportunities to get involved in university decision-making as well. And of course, writing monthly activity reports. I mean, it seems so simple, but it's really important, obviously, you guys as representatives of the students and as board directors to make sure that your work is kind of accounted for in a way that you're making, letting students know what it is that you've done. They've elected you, then maybe they want to know what you're doing throughout the year as well. So that's part of the process. Again, attending meetings of USASA and the uni is required. I've mentioned a couple of those, obviously the board meeting as a minimum, and then committee meetings, and any, projects that you're working on for the uni. Often we'll have USASA board members also invited to work on projects around USASA committees as well. So, and I don't mean USASA board committees, I mean USASA staff committees. So for example, if our event team are coming up with a new event that they want to work on, very often they will have some USASA board reps on that committee to give some feedback and to provide that student perspective as well. So it can be quite diverse, what each board rep does. And I guess I want to make it clear that you don't necessarily have to do every single, other than the minimums of writing activity reports and attending board meetings and so on. You don't have to do every single thing. You don't have to be on every single committee. You don't have to have your finger in every single pie. You will get to work towards your strengths. But it also will be an opportunity for you to learn new things as well. And perhaps you'll be on a committee of something that you didn't even know that you were interested in. And this will give you an opportunity to develop those skills. So yeah, here we go. So here's some examples. So ultimately, the board is really a decision-making responsibility. Being a board member is a decision-making role. Those internal decision-making things, as I mentioned, board meetings, committees, Strategic planning, again, something that the 2022 board will get to work on. And then those external ones. So they're by external, I mean external to USASA, and by that I mean the university. So there are a range of student committees, committees on there that require student membership. So formal inquiries, academic reviews, they're pretty important committees that make decisions that have, lasting consequences for students who are subject to those processes. So it's important that we do have a student voice on that committee to make sure that there is that student perspective being heard when those decisions are being made. And again, this is just like a wide range of different opportunities that do come up. They're not all required necessarily for every single board rep to do, and you will do it within your capacity. But of course, sorry? Hello? Unless you're asking a question, I might just put you on mute if that's okay. All right, cool. I think that might have been an accident. All right, beautiful. So that's the crux of the actual operational things of what the board does. But I guess on like on a broader level, what is the purpose of an actual board? So a board is there to make decisions in the best interest of the organisation and its members. We have covered this, so your members are the students. You also need to ensure that the organisation complies with its own rules. So, I mean, that seems pretty straightforward, but for example, this election that I'm running, this election is the product of an election regulations and what it says in the Constitution. So you'll notice, particularly if you've been around the uni before, we do run a pretty similar way of doing the election each year, and that's because I'm following the guidelines that are in the regulations. I've been, delegated this task to run the election on behalf of the organisation. So of course there does need to be then oversight by the board to make sure that I'm doing that in accordance with the rules that they've set. That's one example. Ensuring good governance is also a term that means, making sure that decisions are being made in a way that is a good way of making decisions, to put it simply. Having processes that are transparent and that include multiple voices and opinions, that's an example of good governance. And it also, means making sure that the right people are in the room and, having those opinions heard as well. It's one example. The next one, ensuring that the organisation maintains a sense of purpose and direction. So one example of a way that the board does this is through being involved in the strategic planning process. So some of you may know this, some of you may not, but USASA establishes a strategic plan every 3 years. That's basically like a big to-do list, a very, what's the word? I don't know, I think the CEO's in the room. Daniel, what's the word? It's like I don't know, can't think of, an aspirational list of goals for the next 3 years. And it says how we're going to do them and why we're going to do them. So, making sure that those things are actually being done is one way of doing that. And you would have noticed on the first slide that mission and vision, making sure that the services that we're providing and what we're doing actually do align with those goals. Because otherwise, what's the point of doing it if we're just going to deviate from it? And, meeting and hearing with the CEO and other paid staff. So again, that's just another thing that the board do, and that's part of the way that they work out that things are being done. It might seem like these things seem a bit, micromanaging. That's definitely not the way that we see this. It's not on that level. It's more like you hear a report and you're like, oh, yeah, that's yes or no. I have some more questions or so on. So you don't have to be across every single tiny detail that's being done. And I don't want that to overwhelm people. And if you're a little bit worried about this kind of thing, I would recommend looking up some resources about, board governance, some more general ones to help you understand it a little bit better. But it's mostly just that kind of, overarching stewardship kind of way of overseeing things. So here we go. So this is good governance in a nutshell. Is this decision in the best interest of USASA, and does it further USASA's objectives? So that's really ultimately what the board does as a decision-making body, and what the board, its purpose is as a collective of individual board representatives. So that's also all a bit very, I guess, abstract perhaps, some of that stuff. So we'll talk a little bit more about the actual, nitty-gritty expectations. That was kind of the overarching bits and bobs that you'll need to do. So now we'll go into what it actually would be required as an individual board rep. So you can expect to spend about 5 hours a week on average as a USASA board rep. Some weeks that might be 10 hours, some weeks that might be 2 hours, depending on the time of year, depending on your own personal academic schedule and so on. Because obviously you will need to make a decision about whether or not you can, whether or not you have the capacity and the time to be able to do this alongside your studies. Because of course we do understand that you are students and that your studies do come first. But of course that is a decision for you to make. Now, I suppose before you nominate or through this process is, can I do an average of 5 hours a week alongside my study and alongside my work and all my other responsibilities? And not only just because there's work to be done, but also because, we really do want you to get some stuff out of this, and you will get out of this role what you put in. So we really do encourage people who are able to do this to, sink their teeth into it and actually be able to get the most out of the role as they can. And you can see on this list here on the left, these are some of the examples of things that reps will do. So board meetings is an absolute minimum. I'll go into that in the next slide a little bit more detail. Committee meetings, again, you choose which committees that you'll be a part of. And if you're chairing a committee or being the convener of a committee, as we put it, then that might be, you might spend a little bit more time doing that kind of work. There are also self-directed projects that the board reps might do. So for example, you might want to organize an activity on campus where you go out and meet students. Again, that's something that you'll need to manage through your own time. And then of course, formal inquiries, advisory groups, working groups, the kind of things that the university would like board reps to do. That's another thing you'll need to factor in. Of course, just doing the background stuff of actually, catching up with the president as they oversee your progress and you decide what you're going to do. And also working with staff is another thing you'll need to consider. There is as well also a compulsory requirement that all board reps will need to do, and that is to attend the board retreat in January. So if you guys have already read a little bit about that on the socials, you will see that that is going to be taking place on the 19th and 20th of January next year. So your terms do start on the 1st of January next year and will go till the 31st of December. So we do have that retreat at the beginning of the year, and basically it's both an induction and a training camp. Essentially, it is an overnight stay, so it's the 19th, the night of the 19th, and then the 20th during the day as well, where you do come together as a board for the first time. You sit down as a group, you have your first board meeting, you set your goals for the year, and you get your training on your finance, on your governance, and all the things that you need to do, all your skills that you'll need to do your term. It is also really important as well, and that is why it's also compulsory. So if you do know now that you can't attend that retreat, you will need to apply for leave, like formal leave request at the time that you put in your nomination form, and then the election appeals committee will make decision about whether or not that leave is approved. I will flag now, they usually don't make that decision until after the close of nominations, and that's just so, in case they get 20 people applying for leave, but only 2 of those people end up being elected, that's a lot of work to do for no reason. So that we usually do wait until after voting before those decisions are made. But essentially, they will assess the reasons why that you need leave, and we'll do what we can to get you there. So if you're applying for leave because maybe you are going to be interstate, that's fine. If you need support getting to Adelaide, USASA will fund that, for example. So if you are an interstate student, say you're for example, the UniSA Online, and you're running for UniSA Online student rep and you live in Melbourne, COVID permitting, of course, we would fund your travel to come to this retreat because it is so important. And I do also want to flag that if you are elected and you don't have leave approved and you don't attend the retreat, then your position will be vacated and you won't actually be on the board any longer. So that if you read the USASA Constitution, that is one of the requirements in there. So it is, I don't think that's happened during my time of working at USASA, and I've worked at USASA for 5 years now. But I can imagine that would be pretty disappointing for someone who's put all that work in. So just do remember that you do put in that leave request or request it at the time you do your nomination. If something comes up after the nominations close, and then that is why you can't come, then that's fine. You'll just need to send me an email and we'll get you that, that leave request form. But don't stress about that now. We'll talk about that at the candidate briefing, which is in a few weeks after nominations close. Yeah. We do also have some other training that is compulsory for the board reps to attend, and we do try and do this via Zoom to make it as accessible as possible, or do it virtually. And one that we did last year was Aboriginal cultural safety training, for example. So there's, some things like that, and occasionally the training of the responding to disclosures of sexual assault and sexual harassment. That's another form of training that the board usually does. And if you're in a USASA club or you've been involved in like a UniSA leadership thing before, you may already be familiar with some of this training or have done it. But I just did want to flag that at a minimum, there's the 5 hours a week, but then there are also these additional once-off things as well. Around event time and orientation and so on, we do strongly encourage board reps to be involved in these events, because they are, a really great way to talk to students. And it's also a really great way to get, the message of USASA out there and to get your face and have people know who you are as the representative. They aren't compulsory, and I would suggest that you do incorporate them into that 5 hours a week. But the reality is sometimes, orientation, it's only twice a year. If you can make time to do that, we do strongly encourage that board reps to attend. And you will get a bunch of emails from me saying, please let me know your availability. We're going to get you on some shifts. So yeah. So that's, the year in a nutshell, and that's the time commitment. In addition, of course, to the other projects that you do work on yourself that are up to you, that is also included in that as well. Again, you do get out of this what you put in though, and so we do strongly encourage that you make the effort. But at a minimum, you will need to come to the board meetings. And again, this is another thing that is in the USASA constitution, which means that the board doesn't have a discretion to override this decision, essentially. It is what it is. And that is that if you don't attend 2 consecutive board meetings or 3 out of 5 consecutive board meetings without being excused by ordinary resolution of the board, which means the board vote to approve your leave or not, then you won't get to attend. Then you won't be able to be on the board anymore. Your position will become vacant. So again, I don't think that's happened very often in the time that I've worked at USASA, but it does show how important it is to attend, and also the importance of those board meetings being the minimum requirement of your role. I've just noticed there's a couple of things in the chat, so I'll just check. All right, beautiful. So you only do 1 semester as a student. So if you're going to enroll, if you're going to be graduating halfway through the year or something like that, I would suggest you do think about that. If you are elected, for example, and then halfway through the year you're no longer on the board, what happens is that the person who was next in line at the election is offered that position, and so on down the list, and then until there's no one left, and then we do have a by-election. So that's what will happen. You will need to I can't stop you from running, and we can't stop you from running. If you have, 3 months that you can be on the board or something like that, you may want to think about, in June, yeah, so you've got 6 months that you'll be on the board. It's not ideal, but it's also not, it's not against the rules. It is something that you will need to consider though. And what's the next one? Considering travel ban, can I file nomination? So unfortunately, if you are currently offshore, you are offshore, and this election is only for onshore students. I know it can be frustrating that, it's due to no fault of your own that you're an offshore student currently, particularly if you were intending on being in Australia for your program. But unfortunately, due to the fact that it is an incorporated association, and there are those kinds of requirements, and that it is in the USASA constitution that members must be onshore, there's no discretion to make any allowances for that. So unfortunately, if you're offshore, you won't be able to nominate. Yeah. Let's see what's going on. Graduating in October. So if you are going to graduate in October, depending on when it is that you are going to graduate, so if it's throughout the entire election period, so this is a very technical governance answer. So if your graduation is after the close of the election period, which is the date that actually, this is a really technical and specific question. Do you mind if we have a chat about this after? Because I just don't want to break the flow of this too much. Yeah, thank you. But don't worry, I will answer that question. And the next one, yeah. So yeah, again, that's a technical question as well about whether you can continue as not a student. So I might just go back to that one at the end if that's all right, folks. Thanks. All right, cool. So this is where we're at so far. So board meeting attendance, why it's so important. And again, this does go into the next point as well about, supporting you in attending these things. So if you are an online or an interstate student, but of course is an onshore student, we do expect that you do come and attend the board retreat in person, and we will fund you in doing that process. We don't want you to go out of pocket in doing that, as it's obviously a requirement of USASA that you are there. For board meetings and staff days, we do, of course, encourage you to come in person if that's within your capacity. And I don't want to speak on behalf of next year's president because, one, they don't exist yet. We don't know who they're going to be, and they may have a different opinion on this. But generally speaking, we have supported the travel of interstate and intrastate, so the Whyalla and Mount Gambier reps, to come and attend those meetings in person if that's within their capacity and they would like to. So we can cover your accommodation, flights and transfers while you're here. But again, that is one of those things that is what's happened in the past. But of course, if the person who's president and the board decides next year that they want to change their mind on that, then they can. But ordinarily we would support those. It will just depend. This process as well, a lot of things have changed in the last few years. So obviously we now sometimes do board meetings online just in general. So we've had a couple of board meetings that have been during lockdown, for example. So the organisation has gotten pretty good at being able to facilitate these kinds of meetings online and to reduce the need for travel at all. So if you are thinking about running, but, for example, you would need childcare for the night to attend, I don't want you to get too worried that you'll be, missing out, because a lot of things do tend to happen online these days anyway. So we do have those kinds of accommodations available. But I did just want to raise the point as well that we don't want you to go out of pocket in getting, to these things. If you're required to come as a board member, the organisation will support you to come. So I guess that's the role itself on those kind of expectations levels. I guess to recap, you really will need to think about, your own time, your own, circumstances of what you're doing, whether you have to work full time. And, that's fine. We do have a lot of reps who have worked full time and have been able to manage it. It's just up to you and what you're prepared to do. Again, and I will reiterate the point because I think this is so important, but you really do get it out of this what you want to put in. So you really do, you get out of this what you put in. There's a lot of opportunities that you'll get being on the board that you may not get as an ordinary student, like for example being on the hiring panel of a manager in the university. Like that's the kind of thing that is a really valuable opportunity for your own professional development and your own skills and your own networking and so on. So there are trade-offs to be made, but it really can be worth it for you. So I will now go a little bit into the election process itself, just to recap some of the things, and maybe this is where we might get some more questions. But basically, I've gone the wrong way. Here are the main eligibility requirements. Now, these will also be published in the election notice, which is a formal document that's going to be published on Monday, the 6th of September. And you'll be able to read that on the USASA.sa.edu.au/election website. And we are also going to send that out in an email to all students as well. So you will get to read these in a bit more detail. But basically, you've got to be an ordinary member of USASA. What that means is that you're a student, and a student who's not an exchange student, as a bit of a precursor there. You must be onshore, physically located in Australia. So again, I do feel for the people who, by no fault of their own, are in that position where they're offshore students currently, but unfortunately, we have no discretion to change that. And I think you would find it really difficult to be able to do that in a completely different time zone and that kind of thing anyway. The next one is never having been removed or vacated from a position. So what that means, if, for example, if you were on the board last year and you didn't turn up for 2 meetings in a row, that's an involuntary vacation of position, for example. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you probably have not been in that position, because you would have heard about what that means by then. You also can't be a permanent or fixed term contract employee of USASA or UniSA. This doesn't apply to casual staff generally. If you are employed by the university in some capacity and you do want to specifically check whether this applies to you, I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you offline to work it out. For example, we have had staff, USASA board reps who have a casual position at Campus Central or something, for example. That's not going to make you ineligible. But, you know, if you're on a 2-year contract to do something, that's a different story. So if you do have a contract or whatever and you want to talk about it to check whether it's covered by this, we can do that privately. The next one is never having been convicted of an indictable offence or an offence relating to fraud or dishonesty. So this is one that comes back to, you know, USASA status as an incorporated association and the fact that board members will be the committee of management, the directors for that organisation. This is a requirement not only of the USASA constitution, but also by state legislation as well. So this is also why we ask for a police check and a criminal history check when we are getting your eligibility before you begin. And that's because we would hate for you to, you know, start and then realise that you're not actually eligible and have to leave your term. It's also part of our due diligence as an organisation to make sure that we are, you know, as I said before, doing good governance and making sure that the people that we're electing, well, the people that we're allowing to become board members and being inducted to be board members are in fact eligible to do so. So that is why we do ask for a police check. If you're not sure what indictable means, it means an offence that there's a penalty where you could go to jail for. So if you do have something in your history that you aren't so sure of, again, happy to, I mean, obviously you don't have to tell me or anything like that, but it's something that we can talk about privately if you need to, if you're not sure, or just, you know, I think you'll know, I think, if that applies to you. And then the next one seems a bit odd, but it's agree to comply with the directions from the Commissioner in connection with any application for a liquor licence in SA. So that's something that's in the Constitution back when USASA used to manage a bar, which we no longer manage a bar. But it's also because, of course, if you guys are the responsible members of the organisation, you have the duty to make sure that, you know, people acting as agents of USASA, such as our staff, are following the rules. And if we have an event where we need a liquor license for, ultimately you guys are, you know, responsible for making sure that that is being carried out. So that's just another thing a theoretical requirement that you'll need to consider as well. But really it's those top 5 that you'll need to think about. Oops. So we do have, so there are 2 positions that run this election, and that is the returning officer and the assistant returning officer. So I'm the assistant returning officer, and Deborah Arnold is the name of the returning officer. So Deborah is external to USASA. She gets hired specifically to do this process during the election. And that is because it's her job to oversee the entire election process and making sure that we're complying with the regulations. When decisions come through that need to be made, for example, you know, about nomination forms, if a nomination comes in late or something like that, then it's up to Deb to make that decision. And she may delegate aspects of the election to the assistant returning officer, which is me. So basically what this means is that Deb makes the decisions about the election and I do all the busy work. So I'm the one who, you know, has these meetings and supports the process and writes the Facebook posts. Also, if you checked our Instagram today, you would have seen my Instagram stories that I did to promote this. So, you know, all that kind of stuff to actually administer the election, but I don't actually really make the decisions. And there is a reason for this. It's because I, obviously, as a member of USASA, I'm here now with the current board and I'll be here next year with whoever's elected. So we do this process to make sure that we have that level of separation and transparency. And again, it's an example of another good governance process where we want to make sure that it's not too close to the decisions being made of the people, you know, having to live with them. So that's why we do have an external person running this. If you have any really tricky questions or stuff that I'm not able to cover, and that may be the case when we get to the end of this session, feel free to email Deborah. She's more than happy to take emails about the election. You will also meet her at the candidate briefing, which we're going to have on either the 20th or the 22nd of September, which was one of those compulsory requirements that is part of this process. So Deborah will be in that session, and that's when you'll get to meet her and hear more about the specifics of the role. So if you think about it, this session that we're having tonight is just me. I'm here with my coordinator, governance and student leadership hat on. And then when we're in that session in a couple of weeks, I'll be having my assistant returning officer hat on. And that's why Deb will be there too. So that's just some important stuff to know there as well. So nominations will open on Monday at 9 a.m. You will notice that at 9 a.m, that's when we'll add a button to the election webpage that says nominate now, and you'll click on that and it will take you to the nomination form. I will urge you all to read that nomination form really carefully and make sure that you are filling it out correctly. If I notice that you've missed out some information on there, or you've put your address, for example, but it's not a complete address, I will get in touch with you and I will let you know. But to reduce the admin on us and to, do your part of things, I'll get you to double check all of that and make sure that it is coming through quite accurately. You will receive an email from me within 2 business days of when you submit your nomination form. And that is for me I will then confirm which positions that you're running for and let you know that we have received your nomination. If you do list on the form if you do select on the form that you will need to be requiring leave from the board retreat, I will also include the link to that leave request in that email. So that's when you'll get that. Because just another reminder, that will need to be submitted before 4 p.m. on Friday the 17th, because that is when nominations close. So yeah, basically your main hub of information and, to get the election notice and the nomination form are both available at that URL that I've got there on the page. Hopefully you're all pretty familiar with that page right now, because that's probably how you RSVP'd for this session and downloaded the link. But yeah, that's going to be where all of the main information around this is stored throughout this whole election. I've just noticed a couple more questions in the chat. No, non-drinkers. Yeah, a person who doesn't drink can still become a rep. That's fine. It's more just like, definitely, you can definitely be on the board if you don't drink. That's fine. What that meant before about the liquor license is more just if like the person from the government, for example, who gives out liquor licenses, if they have a requirement of USASA to do something, like we'll just have to follow that, and that's what the board will be responsible for. The retreat is in SA. It is going to be in Harndorf, and you will, which is in the Adelaide Hills. It's not very far from the city, and your travel to that retreat will be organised. So usually what happens is that we just organise a bus from Adelaide City, the City West campus, on the morning of that retreat, and you all go up together as a group and then come back down again the next day. That's how that works. But yeah. Cool. So yeah, for anyone wondering, I just realized before that you probably can't see the questions in the chat. So that first one was just clarifying my point about the Liquor Licensing Commission. And then that second question was asking where the retreat was going to be held. Cool. So that's the nomination process. Then when voting actually happens, which is a few weeks away now, but I'll mention it now, it will be completely online, the voting. So if you've been a UniSA student in the past, you will probably remember this process. You will get all students get emailed a link from a company called BigPulse, which is a third-party company that runs our elections. It's not the prettiest voting platform. To be honest, the interface isn't the most well-designed, you could say, in terms of being aesthetically pleasing, but they do have a really good track record of their security and all of those things, and they do know how our elections work. So forgive us for the ugly website, but it does mean that your vote is safe, and that this is what they do. They run online elections and make sure that things are secure. The vote is counted by a single transferable vote with optional preferences, which for anyone who's not an election nut like me, basically it means, it's proportional representation. It's the way the Australian Senate is counted. You don't need to know that, right? Like, you don't need to know this specifically to be a board rep or to run in the election. I just like to let people know because, one, I think elections are really interesting, and 2, because, if you know, like, what that means, then that will help you, I guess, think about, whether you want to have preferences and that kind of thing when you go to cast your own vote as well, and the way that that gets carried. But it does also mean that people have won on preferences in the past. And as I mentioned before, if someone's position is vacated and you're next in line after that process, you might then be invited to join the board later down the track as well. So that preferencing system does mean that there are, I guess, a ranking of the candidates in that sense by the students that can have results. So it will open on Monday at 9 a.m. on the 11th of October, and will close at 4 p.m. on Friday, the 15th of October. So voting is only open for a week, you'll notice, partly because, there's only so many emails that students can take about voting being open, and also because we want to keep that process, we don't want everyone to get bored of the election at that point, and we want to keep you guys safe and happy if you do decide to go out and campaign. You'd get very tired if you were out there every day trying to convince people to vote for you, and so on. Cool. So you will also, after the close of nominations, need to attend one of these compulsory candidate briefings. And this is when we will go into quite a bit more detail about the stuff about, if you've heard me say the word campaign and you're wondering what that means, or whether you need to, or that kind of thing, we do talk about that in the session. We do also go over the process for lodging a complaint or an appeal about the election as well. If for any reason you do need to do that beforehand, read the election regulations that will go through the process, but we do go over that because, of course, election regulations, that can be it's not quite legalese, like it is written quite easy to understand, but for people who aren't used to going through those kinds of documents and trying to interpret what they mean, we do want to make sure that we do explain that to you, and to make sure that you are all equally understanding on how those things work. We will also go into a bit more detail about the election process as well, and where we're at that point. And we will give you the instructions for your candidate photographs and statements. That is, if you've been involved at USASA in elections in the past, or you've seen them, you will notice that candidates have to submit a small photograph and just write a brief statement about why it is they're running. We'll go into detail about what's required for that and the process for submitting those in that session. But again, just want to put your mind to that now, just so you know that is something that you will need to do in the future. Those two sessions that we've chosen, so the Monday the 20th or Wednesday the 22nd, we hope that you can attend those at those times. And we have obviously put them on 2 different days and running 2 just to try and make sure that, you can come to at least one of them. If you definitely can't come to either of them, you can indicate on your nomination form that you can't attend. So those so someone just asked via Zoom, where will they be? They will be held via Zoom. So we'll have these remotely to make it a bit more accessible as well. We used to do these in person, but last year, due to COVID, we learned that we can do these via Zoom in a way that is still equitable and still upholds those good governance principles. So yeah, that's been a good thing for us that we're able to do that as well. Yeah, so if you know that you can't come to those, say that's you've got class or something, or that kind of thing that you can't get out of, you can apply to do a different session. We will want to know why you need to do it at a different time, because obviously that's then an additional 45 minutes that we need to take for each person to run that next session, and to, fit that around what we already do. But we will, we'll be reasonable in this. We do want people to be able to participate in this process. So we will try and be accommodating, but I do really encourage you to try and make either of those sessions work. It will just make things a lot smoother. And it will also mean that you'll get the benefit of hearing other people's questions and so on as well, because those sessions will not be recorded and they will only be able to be attended by candidates. It's also really important that you must attend the entirety of the session. Again, you will need to be there for that whole time. I do have 6 p.m. till 7 p.m. on there. Usually they only take about 45 minutes, so it doesn't go for that whole time, but I wouldn't put money on it. I wouldn't gamble that to think that you might be able to go early if you do have something that starts at like 6:30 or something like that. Like you really do need to be on time, or 5 minutes early, just to make sure. And if there are any technical difficulties that of reason why you have dropped out halfway through the call or whatever, the burden will be on you to demonstrate to us that you've tried to stay in there in that session, or what you've done to find out that information. So it is a little bit stricter. Obviously, it's not, it's kind of the same format as this session in the sense that it will be online, but it is actually a strict governance requirement of the election. So we do ask that you do take that a bit more seriously. Now, obviously, I've just gone into a bit more hard doom and gloom, and we've talked a little bit about the challenges or the requirements or the stuff that you will need to do to run in this process, and then when you are on the board. But it really is worth it. Like I mentioned before, there's a bunch of opportunities that you'll get as a board rep that you may not get to do otherwise. It's also really personally rewarding. Like, I don't know if anyone's had any experience being in a volunteer role or doing this kind of stuff before, but I remember back just when I was at uni many years ago doing this kind of thing where I don't know, it's just you're part of a group, you're part of a community, you have a bit more purpose than just going in and doing your studies. And then you do really get to see the outcomes of the work that you're doing in a way that impacts a lot of people. And there's something really rewarding about that, that I really, chase that feeling. Like, I think it's worth doing. You also will get a lot of ongoing support, training and coaching as well. So again, I mentioned that we don't expect you all to be expert board directors or to know exactly the ins and outs of everything that will be required. We do give you that training. And of course, again, that's why the board retreat is so important, because that's what the foundation of a lot of that. You will get to develop a lot of skills that are, that employers want, the kind of stuff that makes you have some experience in the workplace environment and that kind of stuff as well. And to have that kind of background. So if you've read the position descriptions that are on the election website, you may have noticed some of these skills that we've plucked out. So this is what we think are the skills that you'll get out of being on the board. It's not the skills necessarily that are required from the very beginning. It's the things that you'll have at the end if you put the work in and you get in, and what you'll get out of this. So of course, leadership. This is a leadership position ultimately. Problem solving. Like, there's going to be times when a student comes to you with a problem you're not quite sure, and you're going to help them solve that problem. And by problem, I really mean like, I want lockers on this campus and they don't exist. What are the steps that I'll need to do to make this thing happen at the uni, or that kind of thing. In committees, you'll definitely have a lot of opportunities to debate ideas and to try and come to solutions together. And that it also comes into, like, I'm going from top to bottom, left to right, top to bottom, by the way. So negotiating and influencing, that's another one that's going to come up in this. It's all about, trying to get other people to see your point of view, but also trying to take their points of view as well. Policy interpretation and application. Already by doing this election process, you're interpreting and applying the election regulations and stuff. So this is already a skill that you're going to have from just being involved in the election from the beginning. Accounting and financial analysis, particularly for those of you who join the finance committee, that's something that you're going to get to experience. That I remember when I started working here, I had no idea the difference between like a balance sheet or profit and loss statement, but you're going to see that every year, every month come through in the board papers, and you're going to have an understanding of how these things work by the end of the year. Seeking and responding to feedback is also something that you'll need to do as a rep, and that's kind of the representative function where, if you're the McGill rep and there's an issue affecting McGill students, you're going to want to find out what that is and then work out how you can communicate back to students how you've helped solve that, or, what you've done. Again, high-level written and verbal communication skills. So you're going to be writing reports every month. You're going to be participating in meetings. You're going to be having conversations with quite senior people in the university and at USASA. That's really going to develop your communication skills. Of course, time management is another one that you're going to work on. You're going to be able to juggle having to come to committees and having to go to compulsory things around your studies. That's a really important skill to learn too. You're also going to work with a lot of different people and a really diverse group of people as well. We often have really diverse backgrounds of the people that end up being on the board. And of course, the people who work at UniSA and at USASA are quite diverse as well. So you're going to get to meet people from all walks of life, from different countries, different age groups, different backgrounds, all of that kind of stuff. You'll really get to see a big diverse view of opinions and people. Risk assessment is another one that you'll get to do on the board, because that's essentially what you do as directors. You make decisions based on assessing risk. And that's a really interesting process to learn how to do. Conflict resolution might be another one. I would put that, in a similar category as debating ideas and producing consensus, and negotiation and influencing. These are all interpersonal skills that you're going to get out of this, because you're going to be working with some people who don't always agree on everything at a time, and you're going to want to work out how to go through that process. Again, public speaking and presenting, very similar to the communication skills above. Resilience, this is going to be one you're going to learn too, because you're not going to get your way every time, and you're going to have to learn that sometimes things don't always go to plan the first way, but it's all about persevering and bouncing back from those challenges. And this last one is my very favorite, which is critical and analytical thinking. You are going to read a lot of documents that you may not understand at first, and you're going to have to work out what they mean. You're going to have to apply what you know, ask questions, making sure you're learning how to ask the right questions. These are things that will come out of this as well. I really love trying to coach board reps on critical and analytical thinking. I really like to play the devil's advocate role when you come up to me with an idea, and really help you try and develop how you can justify that, and really develop how to get to that stage where you're able to produce a consensus about your ideas. So look, these are a lot of the things that you'll get to do, and the skills that you'll get to learn. Of course, there are many more, and I'm sure there are many skills that I haven't even thought of that you'll get to do, but this is just some of the key ones that I want to point out of why it really is worth doing this stuff, and getting involved in the uni at this level as well. So that's my spiel about why it's worth it. Throughout that, does anyone have any questions about this whole process or anything that I may or may not have covered today? I'm happy for you to use the hand up function, or just unmute your microphone and send it through. No? All right, cool. Well, maybe I'll just go back to that question before about if you're graduating halfway through the year. So, all right, so hang on, I'll answer S. Parsons' question first, which was, I've finished your studies and I'll graduate in October, considering to study next year. Am I eligible to apply? This is a really tricky one, because it depends when in the year when in October you are graduating. So throughout the election process itself, which starts on, we have what's called the election period, and that's a term that's in the election regulations. That starts on the 6th of September and goes until the final result is announced, is determined. The final result, technically we don't know when the final result will be, because it depends on 5 business days after the provisional result, if that makes sense. So you might want to have a look at the regulations and see. I'm not sure when your graduations are in October.
I think it's the 19th. Hi, Bridget.
Hello, how you going?
Good, thank you. Yeah, I think it's the 19th. I live remotely and would I'm not able to attend in South Australia. I live in Western Australia's northwest.
Oh, yeah.
And would be looking at potentially applying for the online position.
Yeah.
As a mature age student. So yeah, I was just had some questions about that. Graduation, I think, is the 19th of October.
It sounds like it'll be a bit of a tricky one, because I don't think the election period will be finished by then. Although actually, the next part of this answer is the trickiest part, which is when you get your offer for next year. So that will also make a difference.
Okay.
I have a feeling this is going to be one of those responses that will be very specific to you. So maybe if you really want to know, I'm more than happy to take this to someone who will be able to tell you. So if you want to put this in an email, maybe, and send it to me, we can work this out for you and your circumstances.
Is the general idea is that you need to be a currently active student to be on this board?
You need to be a student sometime during this year. It's a really hard question to answer. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No worries.
But if you put it in an email, I'm more than happy to give it to someone who will be able to give you a much more specific and accurate answer that I'm able to provide off the cuff right now.
Sure. And the email is the email address where I've got this link for today's Zoom?
Yeah, so I think whichever one I sent it from, either USASA.studentvoice or Bridget.Laffey.
Okay, no worries.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And I did have another question before from someone saying, can they graduate? If they graduate halfway through the year, can they continue on the board? Again, this is one of those things that does come up every year. And in fact, I think we're tackling this with a current board member at the moment. It really does depend on what your individual circumstances are at the time that you graduate. So you don't necessarily have to vacate your position, but you do need to meet the requirements of being a board member the entire time. So again, it does come down to your individual circumstances at the time. So it is quite possible that I won't be able to give you an accurate answer until June next year. If that, I know that may not be very helpful, but you know, if you were wanting to run and you are prepared to do what you need to do, then then do that. Don't miss out on the opportunity now just for a hypothetical, I suppose, of what could happen. But yeah. Cool. Well, it's pretty bang on 7 o'clock now, just a little bit after. If I'm going to stop the recording and stop the stream. Oh, hang on. I've got a question from Twitch. So yeah, offshore students aren't eligible, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, it's in the USASA Constitution, and it's also a requirement from the of being a director that you must be onshore, which is physically located in Australia. So sorry about that for those who are affected, but yeah, we aren't able to change that. Cool.
Just had a quick one for you, Bridget. You just mentioned then that you wouldn't be able to give an answer to the other person until June next year. So my understanding is we've got the election coming up, and if successful, it runs from January next year.
Yeah, so their question was, can they continue in their role after they graduate next year if they are elected? And they're, okay. So they had a slightly different question than you, but yeah.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, no worries. I'll email you, thank you.
No worries, thank you so much for participating. Does anyone else, are there any other questions from Twitch? Rachel, you might be coming through. Nah, all right, if anyone is still on that stream and they do have any questions, feel free to email me at bridget.laffey@USASA.edu.au or USASA.studentvoice@USASA.edu.au, and we will be able to get back to you. Thank you everyone so much for participating. I hope you got some valuable information about this and were able to, get some more food for thought before you decide. I hope you all do nominate next week if this is what you decide to do. It's a really great opportunity, and I hope that we can get as many students involved as are willing to do the work. So awesome. Thank you.
Can I ask my question? Excuse me.
Yeah, hang on. Who am I speaking to? I just can't see the screen. Yep, hello.
So I put my question at the chat. You can look. Okay.
Yeah, so that is something that I can't really answer. So sometimes students like to campaign together as a group to help them to help promote each other as a thing. That's not really something that has anything to do with my part of the process. You might want to talk to the whoever's involved in that, but yeah, people do run as individuals as well, and you don't have to campaign as a group in order to run for the election either. I hope that answers your question. Cool. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that, and I will see you guys later. Thank you.